In 1948, Truman was taking a break from work when he met the man he would spend the rest of his life with, a handsome 34-year-old writer named Jack Dunphy, who was 10 years older than Capote.
It was one of those moments, like a thunderclap, in which, when their eyes met, it was obvious that there was something that had been struck between the two of them.
According to friends, it was a case of opposites attracting. Capote, the ultimate social butterfly, had fallen for a very private man.
He adored Truman, and he supported Truman in everything, but he didn't go where Truman went. Partly he didn't want to be Truman's other half and in the shadow, and partly he wanted Truman to shine on his own.
Truman and Jack remained a couple for the next 35 years, sharing homes in Switzerland, New York, and the Hamptons. And throughout the 1950s, as Capote became more of a public figure, he was always upfront about his sexuality. In fact, being openly homosexual would be an important part of his image.
Well, I don't think Truman ever came out of the closet. He was always out of it from the word go.
He certainly never tried to hide it, nor could he have, because he was a kind of anomaly. He was a very feminine man.
Either one has style or one doesn't, but style is oneself. It's something that you cannot learn. It's something that has to come from within you and bit by bit be arrived at, and it's simply there like the color of your eyes.
By the 1950s, Capote's ever-expanding network of friends now included such elegant, high society women as Babe Paley, C.Z. Guest, Gloria Guinness, and Lee Radziwill. He was mesmerized by these grand ladies whom he called his swans.
He loved beautiful people. He loved to look at them, and he loved to talk to them, and he loved the style of being with them. And the fact that he could be part of their social life, it gave him a certain glamour and gave him a certain ambiance, which he really loved.
And for the swans, Capote was great fun to be with. He liked to go to lunch and chat. He was not a threat to their husbands, and let's face it, he knew the dirt on everyone.
He knew everything. He had a better gossip system than the CIA or the KGB. People would tell Truman things they would tell no one else in the world, including husband, wife, mother, father.
Well, he was so damn seductive. I mean, my God, he could draw anything out of anybody. Because, I mean, he'd sit very close to that person. I mean, they'd be absolutely mesmerizing, especially the questions. He made it sound intriguing.
Here we are at Tiffany's. Yeah. Breakfast at. Breakfast at. Breakfast at Tiffany's. And I haven't had any breakfast, so we might as well go on in there. Okay.
In 1958, Capote used his stylish women friends as inspiration for his most whimsical novel, Breakfast at Tiffany's. The book was almost immediately made into a movie, starring Audrey Hepburn as Holly Golightly, a beautiful, carefree party girl.
I'd marry you for your money in a minute. Would you marry me for my money?
In a minute.
For a long while after the book came out, it became a kind of parlor game to guess which of his women friends Capote had modeled Holly after.
Later on, one of them said, "It's me, it's me, it's me." And Truman said to a friend of his, "Well, it's her, and it's about 6 others as well."
The book got great reviews. Said Norman Mailer, "Capote is the most perfect writer of my generation. I would not have changed 2 words in Breakfast at Tiffany's." Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Truman Capote's fame grew to the point where he was a nationally known celebrity.
Will you welcome, please, Mr. Truman Capote?
People knew him not only as a successful writer, but as that funny little man who appeared on all the television talk shows.
What is the nearest thing in physical sensation to an orgasm? And I came up with the idea that it was sneezing. But
did I read somewhere that you said all actors are stupid?
You're overstating it.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
I said most actors are stupid.
Most actors.
Despite Capote's growing fame, he never stopped writing. And in the late 1950s, he decided to try something new. For a long time, he had toyed with the idea of writing about a real event using the skills of a novelist and a journalist. With that goal in mind, he opened the New York Times on Monday, November 16, 1959, and spotted this news item about the brutal murder of a Kansas farm family. The piece gave few details, but by mid-December, Capote had arrived in Kansas, where he began work on his greatest masterpiece, a true crime novel called In Cold Blood. Garden City, Kansas, a small town in the middle of the American heartland. It was here that Truman Capote came to research his new novel.
In Cold Blood is the story about the murder of a family in a small town in western Kansas. Mr. Herbert W. Clutter and his wife, Bonnie Clutter, and their 2 teenage children. This was an especially strange and brutal murder in 1959 in which the family was shot, done to death, for no apparent cause or motive whatever. My book is a completely factual account, and every word in it is true and based on innumerable interviews with the people directly concerned over a period of 5 years.
When Capote first arrived in Kansas in 1959, the townspeople were still reeling from the shock of this horrible murder. And they weren't quite sure what to make of this strange little man with the high-pitched voice who was asking a lot of questions.
They didn't like him out in Garden City. He had a manner about him that did not fit in with good old solid western Kansas folk. He was gay. But, you know, I got to give him credit. He had the tenacity to stay there and talk to people. He probably talked to more people than the Bureau did.
December 30th, 1959. After a 2-month investigation, local authorities cracked the Clutter case, taking into custody 2 ex-cons, Perry Smith and Richard Hickok, who were suspected of murdering the Clutter family during a botched robbery. Capote attended every day of the boys' trial, which began in March 1960. But since the prosecution had conclusive physical evidence tying them to the crime, the question was never guilty or innocent, but life or death. It took the jury just 40 minutes to decide: death by hanging. As the appeals process was set in motion, Capote retreated to his home in Switzerland to write his book. His research had been exhaustive. By his own estimate, he had amassed more than 6,000 pages of notes. By 1963, Capote had finished all but the last chapter, which he could not complete until he knew the fate of Smith and Hickok, who he'd interviewed extensively as they sat waiting on death row.
Dick is very easy to get along with and easy to know because he was like somebody you would meet on a train who would just start up an instant conversation and want to tell you everything that ever happened to him. But Perry was a strange and difficult boy. But for the two, I certainly got, in the end, what I consider closer to him because he was so difficult to get close to.
Over the next 2 years, Capote would become the boys' main link with what Hickok called the free world. He visited them periodically, sent them letters. But as Truman grew more emotionally attached, this 5-year death watch became a grueling ordeal.
Truman had begun in cold blood, and he knew that it would be the book that would make him. At the same time, he had become friendly with the two killers. He could not become famous and rich until they were dead, until they were executed. And so he was in this terrible dilemma of wanting them dead, but yet not wanting them dead.